This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 251 of the GardenDC podcast. Healthy soil provides the essential nutrients, water, and structural support for our garden plants to grow strong and healthy. In this episode, we talk with Deborah Knapke, known as the Garden Sage, all about soil care basics. The plant profile is on Globe Amaranth, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on Max Mia and the Sunflowers by Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Deborah Knapke, also known as the Garden Sage. Welcome, Deborah.
It's so nice to be here.
Great to have you, Deborah. And we just saw each other a few weeks ago at the Cultivate show in Columbus, Ohio. And we're going to be talking in this episode all about soil health, soil care, soil quality. But before we get into all of that, Deborah, we're going to dial it back to little baby Deb. And I'm going to ask if you were born with chlorophyll in your veins and a green thumb.
So, in a way, yes. My earliest memories are my Nana's rose garden, my dad's vegetable garden. I remember smelling carnations at a very young age. In my college years, in my apartment, I had 54 different houseplants. My boyfriend was not happy about having to take care of them when I was not there. For me, this is my third career. So my first two careers, one was music, then speech language pathology, because I always thought about plants as being a hobby, not as a job or profession. And when I got tired of where I was in speech language pathology, I thought, I wonder if I could major in plants. So got my master's when our youngest was in kindergarten, and I've been extremely happy ever since.
So your youngest is no longer in kindergarten.
No, in fact, my youngest is an aerospace engineer, has a job. My oldest is a designer, interior designer, and our middle one's a lawyer. So we kind of spread them all out in all the professions. And I'm happy to say that they all have their own homes, spouses, and children. And we are empty nesters, but we go visit periodically. And interestingly enough, they are all starting to garden. And then I get questions like, Mom, is this right?
So full circle. That's what I was going to ask. Have the little birds fallen far from the nest?
Well, I have to say, my daughter is very good at killing plants, but her daughter's pretty good at keeping them alive. So I think they kind of balance each other out. But I've started buying raised beds for them so that they can get above the ground. A couple of the places where they live, the ground is really poor. So they're learning how to an environment, mostly for vegetables, in a raised bed. And so I've had a lot of discussions with them about soil health, or what do you do? What do you use? How do you take care of your plants? And it's been interesting because the engineer has completely different questions than the artist.
That
Yeah.
would make sense. And so you're known as the Garden Sage. How did that come about?
So when I filed for a business name, you have to come up with something. And herbs are probably my home place when we talk about plants. Just love herbs. And so I had all these words. I had garden, I had thyme, lavender, sage, I had ecology. You know how you make those lists of words. And my husband picked out, how about garden sage? I love sage. And I said, is that because I'm so wise? And he said, No, it's because you never shut up. Actually, he did say that. He sometimes denies it with a smirk on his face, but it was all said in fun. And there are times when I might get so excited that I don't pay attention to people's eyes glazing over, but I do love what I do. And it is a passionate endeavor. Not only is gardening, plants, ecology, soil, not only are they my profession, but they're also my avocation. Just very important to me.
Hmm. And I was thinking about what you were saying about people's eyes glazing over. That never happens to me, Deborah. Clearly joking, but I was going to say that I think of Garden DC as a safe space for, garden geeks, plant nerds, and the
Mm-hmm.
like to opine about their passion here. And should others, eyes glaze over or ears shut down, we're here for you.
Thank you. And I have to say, I do work at a garden center, and I have learned that you can't go too far. If you keep on going, you see the obvious glazing over the eyes. So I'm really good at telling someone how to water in 30 to 45 seconds and how to plant a tree in about a minute. So you get to where you refine what you say so that people don't say, oh, don't go talk to her. She'll just bore you to death.
Valuable skill to have.
Mm-hmm.
So let's turn to the topic of soil health and care. And I think initially we want to talk about what makes good soil, right? So some people will tell me they have horrible soil or they just have the worst growing conditions, but those vary, right?
They do. And it's interesting because everyone says, oh, yeah, I have clay. Well, it's not that simple. And what many people have is compacted soil. And it may be clay, it may be silt, there may be even some sand in it. I'm in the state of Ohio, and this is true for any state that anyone is in. You have different types of soil depending on where you live. So, where I live, we have silty clays. But up by the lake, and I'm working on a project up by the lake, they have these sandy soils that are kind of amazing, totally different from mine. And I start thinking about, well, if I had soils like these, what would I be doing differently than what I do in my own garden? So I start thinking about my dad who lived east of Cleveland and could grow beautiful rhododendrons. And down here in Columbus, they just limp along. But so it's more than just whether it's clay, silt, or sand, but it's also pH? And do you have organic matter? And is your house a new build? Did somebody take a tractor over your what is now your front lawn and compact your soil so hard that it's like rock? So it's all these factors that go in together that define the soil we have. So a lot of times when I'm talking to someone and they're telling me about their soil, I start asking those questions like what grows in your yard? What's successful? What dies? And it's kind of a process, sort of a detective process, because again, and I mentioned pH. In Ohio, we have almost a vertical dividing line where we have alkaline soils on the west side of the state and acidic soils on the east, because that's where the Appalachian Mountains are. And you get some of those red clays. So, it's just looking at these soil regions, or as we say, soil ecology. There's something called physiographic regions. And those regions are across the United States, and there's a great map you can get online if you put in physiographic regions, United States, or your own state, which can be very educational. And you start seeing how much your states vary. And you're in Pennsylvania, correct?
Actually in Maryland,
That's right,
right near
Maryland.
DC. So
Okay.
I'm right near that fall line, which is
Ah,
pretty much I've if you
mm-hmm.
follow the I-95 corridor down. So to the right, you have the more sandy soils, and then to the left of the fall line is the more Piedmont.
So you're that mid-Atlantic coastal plain going on to the Appalachian Piedmont. Oh, I
Hmm.
see you right here. So you're
Hmm.
right on that line? Because
Yep.
I'm looking at the map.
Yeah. There's actually, so there's, I don't know if you've visited, and maybe listeners have visited Great Falls outside of DC. That's the fall line. Like
Okay.
literally, that's the fall line between those two ecoregions. And it's pretty abrupt and pretty surprising also how a lot of storms track up that exact line,
Mm-hmm.
and just the very, very difference in the growing capacity and what you can grow on each side of that line.
And it's fascinating to me. Soil's always been fascinating because it's where everything starts. It's our foundation. So if the soil's not right, then the garden's not right. And like you're saying, you have that fall line, that kind of division, sand versus. So is the other side more of that clay?
Oh, not just more of that clay. It's heavy clay.
Heavy clay.
So, what was funny is when I dug my little backyard pond, the
Mm,
first foot and a half, solid clay, just solid, traditional southern clay. And then I hit a pocket of sand. I couldn't believe it. And it was like smooth sailing for the next foot and a half down, just sand. And I attribute that to being so close to the fall line. And what another geologist has told me is a nearby dinosaur beach line from a bygone era. But yeah, it's really interesting to look at some of the local soil types here and the mix.
I find that fascinating to be right on that edge to experience both. As you travel through Ohio, you can see some of those edges. At least I can because of the vegetation types. All of a sudden, vegetation changes. And
Hmm.
that's my cue that, okay, something's different under the ground. And we don't think about under the ground that much, even though if you're a gardener, you do. But most normal people don't think about what's under the ground and don't think about that you look at a tree and you think, wow, that tree is big. But yet there's more biomass from that tree underneath the ground than there is above.
Hmm. Yeah, and you were saying some of the clues to the soil below are in what you see growing above.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen sometimes charts and that people make of if this weed is in your yard, that means you have this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you study that?
I have because, well, just take the wonderful dandelion that
Hmm.
so many people spend lots of money to get rid of and the taproot. Well, they like disturbed soils and they don't like competition. So if you have a ratty lawn and your dandelions take hold, it's because they have this taproot and they go down and get nutrients and then they bring them up to the top. And interestingly enough, because they do that, it makes it better for other plants to come in. So dandelions are actually making the soil better for other plants. And if you get your lawn nice and healthy, the soil underneath your lawn healthy and other plants come in, the competition makes the dandelions go away. Now, if we use that idea instead of pouring all kinds of herbicides down on the lawn, if we use the idea of competition, making the soil healthy, and then the dandelions disappear. I'd much rather do that than pour something on top of them. And then other plants, let's see, I'm trying to think of the little one that says you have alkaline conditions. I think it's the plantain.
Hmm.
Yeah, says you have alkaline soil. Well, I already know that, but they come up beautifully in my soil. Beautifully. So I am constantly adding compost to not only break up the clay, but to modify that pH, that higher pH, which is for me, depending on where I am in my yard, anywhere from 6.7 to 7.2, 7.3.
Hmm. And we should talk a little bit for our listeners about soil pH. So,
Okay.
if you are high alkaline, why do you want to adjust that down to a more basic or even to an acidic soil?
Well, if you are a vegetable or grower. Most vegetables, the sweet spot for them in pH is around 6.5.
Mm-hmm.
If you are growing fruit crops, most of those like it a little bit lower, around 6. So if you have 7 pH, which is neutral going into alkaline, then you're 10 times less acidic or more alkaline than what the plant wants, because pH is a logarithmic scale, not an arithmetic. So it's not just this little tiny jump from one point to the next, but it's a pretty big step. So if you are a lover of azaleas or
Mm-hmm.
rhododendrons and your soil pH is 7, your azaleas and rhododendrons are not going to make it very well, except for the type that I found based on some research by one of my fellow graduate students way back in the 90s. He looked at different cultivar types because he was looking for alkaline tolerant azaleas. And he didn't find, high alkaline types, but what he did find is that there were some cultivars that would adjust over time to a not so great pH as long as you kept compost on them. And that's what I do. And I've had these, oh gosh, I've had these azaleas now for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just about almost 30 years, not quite.
Yeah, I think some plants are a little more adaptable
Mm-hmm.
than we give them some credit for. I'm thinking roses in particular, they like it slightly acidic to neutral soils, like between 6 to 7. But, give them an acidic fertilizer or something and get
Mm-hmm.
them established, and then they're pretty tough after that.
And something I say a lot is that if you have a soil problem, 9 times out of 10, my answer to you is going to be compost.
Hmm.
Or start using cover crops, which is a regenerative technique. Getting, especially if you have compacted soil, using those cover crops that have deep roots to break up that soil. Although most people may not want to grow daikon radish, it is one of the best cover crops for breaking up soil that has been compacted beyond belief. There are some of the peas, in the pea and bean family, not only do they break up the soil, but they add nitrogen, which is what is sometimes in short supply when we squeeze the bejeepers out of the soil. So it's either compost or cover crops, depending on what you're doing in that location, is what I recommend when people say, my soil just doesn't seem right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I was just going to ask about measuring your pH. So if you're
Mm.
a brand new gardener to a new or inherited garden, how do you go about even knowing your pH?
So there are different possibilities for that. One of the easier ones is sending out a soil sample to a testing facility. I'm not sure what you have in Maryland. In Ohio, we have a couple choices. Some of our extension offices accept samples and then send it to a central facility to get it tested, where you get the pH, your main nutrient percentages, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. They will also tell you how much sand, silt, and clay you have, the percentages. But that pH is really nice to know. And that's somebody else telling you what you have. But you can also there are some kits out there. They may not be as refined as the pH reading that you get with some of the testing services. But you can test your soil with little litmus papers, and they'll give you a general idea if it's acidic or alkaline. What do you have? So you have that choice too.
Hmm. Yeah, I think those little, hardware store, as I call them, tests that are fairly inexpensive, and it gives you at least a quick little reading to know. So say you did have an azalea that was failing, and you might suspect that's why, that the soil is more alkaline in a spot than acidic. That would be something I would recommend doing. I think a lot of people think they have highly acidic soil because they have oak trees, or that's what they've been told, is that we have acidic soil in our region. But if you have a brick house like I do, There's brick
Mm,
dust accumulation. There's other environmental accumulation over the years that might turn your soil more alkaline than you think.
that's a good point. And I don't often think about that. So definitely a good point, especially if around here we use cinder blocks sometimes in some of our buildings, and that
Mm-hmm.
is definitely alkaline.
Yep. And even I see people like will bury chunks of concrete or use
Mm,
them as a border, and I love reuse and recycling in the garden, but maybe concrete not the best choice.
yeah, I think that's like 8.7 or 9
Mm-hmm. And
alkaline.
yeah, and people are not aware what they're doing. I was like, yes, for making like a gabion wall, a
Hmm.
caged wall with chunks of concrete or some type of furniture out of the old concrete chunks. But, ringing a bed in old concrete chunks is going to just shed that kind of concrete dust,
Hmm.
constantly for years into that bed.
Yeah, and also conversely, if you're able to get a hold of sandstone rocks, because in part of Ohio we have great pockets of sandstone, that will slowly give you some acidification.
Mm.
So I'm going to think about this a little bit more. That's opened another window of thought. Thank you.
Well, let's move on to clay versus rocky versus sandy. And those of us who have clay, predominantly, we look at that sandy soil with some jealousy. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure there are sandy soil people that look back over the fence and say the same, or maybe there's some rocky soil people that are looking at both of us and saying, huh.
Well, a lot of times we want to change what we have. And if you have rocky soil, okay, put in a rock garden. If you have sandy soil, find those plants that really have to have good drainage. If you have clay soil and sun, then you put in your clay busting prairie plants. But then we travel and we see something we really love. I remember going to the Pine Barrens in New Jersey and seeing the sweet fern, Comptonia. And I said, oh, I have to have that in my garden.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried 3 times and I failed 3 times because that's not going to grow in my soil because the pine barrens are deeply acidic, and my soil is not. So, when we talk about clay versus sandy, and having different percentages of the textures of our soil because soil is a texture made up of clay, silt, and sand, the mineral component. And some people say the not alive component of soil. And again, and I'm going back to my compost statement. If you don't like what you have and you're trying to make something different, you're probably going to add compost because for sandy soil, they don't hold on to nutrients, but they drain beautifully. So if you want them to hold on to nutrients for those plants that are hungry, 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 then you're going to add compost to make the water and nutrients stick around more. If you have clay soil and you love plants that need absolutely wonderful drainage, you're going to add compost to change the structure, to modify that tight clay structure. So it's again, we talk about this continuum of clay to sand, which is essentially size of particle. Sand, big particle, clay, small particle. And we use compost to modify it to get what we want. Or we learn to love what we have and plant what works there. But that's not the norm. Like Comptonia in my clay
Mm-hmm.
alkaline soil. I wanted it so badly. Well, I'll just have to visit the Pine Barrens to see it again.
Yep. That's the grass is always greener or
Mhm.
the soil is always better in somebody else's region. And so I always think about like the adage, why do we treat our soil like dirt?
Mm. Mhm. Um, I think about that a lot, especially when I see someone pouring something awful on the soil. When I was growing up, when people changed their oil, they just threw it in the backyard, behind the
Yikes.
garage. Remember? Well, I don't know if you remember that, but I'm talking about a long time ago, before we were really paying attention. Somebody was, but not my neighborhood. we just didn't care for the soil. And now we have those little medallions that say, don't dump something in this down this sewer because it goes to the Olentangy River or the Scioto River or the Chesapeake Bay, which I know there's been a lot of cleanup of that. We treat our soil like dirt too, but we don't care for it like we should. And that's that soil care and understanding what it takes to have healthy soil so you can have a healthy garden. And I might have gotten a little off topic there, but that's kind of one of my soapboxes
Mm-hmm.
is that understanding what you have so that you can plant what works there and maybe every once in a while get away with pushing back. I know I can't have this plant here as much as I would want, but maybe I could put it somewhere else, or I could put my lavender in a raised bed, something like that when
Mm-hmm.
all I have is flat.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
What does every USAA member have in common? Family. We're one big family who supports the military community and their eligible families. And if you, your parent, or spouse served, you could join our family and save big on auto insurance. Visit USAA.com/join today to check your eligibility. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
Some new homeowner looking to garden buys an old Cape Cod or little, tiny little bungalow, and they're dealing with contaminants and decades of pollution, maybe pesticide residue in their soil, and they send it out for a soil kit. Maybe they get some readings that tell them that that is what's in their soil. Then what do, Deborah?
So I'm glad you brought that up because when we moved into our house, in the garage, the previous owners had left us some DDT and some lindane, which is really poisonous. You can't get that anymore. They used it for their iris borers. That's like using an atomic bomb, for a problem. But so we found out how to get rid of it. But then, that made me wonder how much of that was in our soils. I do have a couple pockets in my gardens where plants do not grow as well as I would like them to or would expect them to. And I wonder, now we've been in this house for 40 years. So most of that I have mitigated with compost and with cover crops. But every once in a while, if I open a new place in a garden, it takes a while for that garden to take off. So I wonder what had been put down in the soil, because some of these chemicals have quite a half-life, that persist in the soil. So there's a reference that I use, and it's a book that I found as I was searching for how do you deal with contaminants in soil. And this is a book. It's called Phyto, Phyto, by Kate Kennan and Neil Kirkwood. It was first published in 2015. Bought it soon after that because I kept asking people, where is there a reference to tell you what to do when you have problems in your soil and you know it's herbicide or pesticide or, heaven forbid, somebody dumped their oil there? And they said, well, get this book, and this book is great. What it has are these wonderful charts that tell you different plants that will change, will either take up, change the substance, volatilize it, and release it into the atmosphere, which you probably don't want to think about that too much. But there are something like 8 or 9 different ways that plants and soil can help you mitigate problems in the soil. So for instance, and I'm looking at the table of contents here, like volatile organic compounds, VOCs, which I'm sure you've heard about, petroleum products, chlorinated solvents, like, oh gosh, I'm just looking, now I can't, arsenic, yay, arsenic, heavy metals. So there are all these charts that look at that. And I kind of looked at the pesticide one in preparation for talking to you. And not only do they talk about which plants will work for different herbicides, but it gives you examples of types of planting strategies that you can use in a wetland or in a prairie situation or in shade or in sun, such as degradation cover, which means using a cover crop to get that substance out of the soil. Now, when you cut that cover crop, you have to do something with it. You're not going to put it in your compost pile, because if you bring that back into the garden, you've just put the problem back in. So sometimes you are putting plants in that to take it up, like sunflowers. So sunflowers are great for soaking up substances in the garden, pesticides, contaminants, heavy metals, but then you don't want to be eating those sunflower seeds,
Mm-hmm.
It's a thought. But then a living fence, something that you're not going to, a living fence of woody plants, and they're going to stay there and they're just going to keep on bringing up what's in that soil and holding it in that plant. So those are some things that we can think about if we know we have a problem. When you were here for Cultivate and we were touring the different places, there was one place that I wanted to go to that we weren't able to, which was the Whittier Peninsula, which is by our Scioto River. And it had been used as an impound lot. There was a lot of oil left over. There was also some manufacturing and some disposal of manufacturing fluids and substances. So it was officially a brownfield. And there was a lot of remediation that went on so that it could be used again as a park. And the park that was created is called Scioto Audubon Park, because it was a partnership between the city, Metro Parks, and Audubon. And now you see people playing soccer. There's a climbing wall. There's a beautiful building that interprets what they did and what they created. They brought it back to a wetland, because most low-lying places by rivers are wetlands, but it had been turned into almost a desert by it being an impound lot and a manufacturing site. So I don't know if I totally answered your question and have your eyes glazed over. But it's something that fascinates me, that we can use plants to fix the problems we created.
I think that is one of the most interesting aspects that I hear about for soil remediation, of course, is using plants to do the work for us.
Mm-hmm.
And as we talked about, plants are the indicator species of the conditions of the soil too. So having plants do this for us just makes total sense to me.
Mm-hmm. And they've been doing it their whole lives, all through time. They have changed the places they were in. There's a theory, and wasn't in the notes that I sent you, but I just got into a conversation with a fellow horticulturist about the CSR theory, CSR theory. And it's based on understanding ecology and how competition and stress determines how a plant evolves. So C is for competitive, so a plant becomes competitive. S is for stress tolerator. A plant figures out how to deal with the problem. And then there's R for ruderal, which is a hard word to say, which are our weeds. And our weeds figured out, okay, get in there, little root system, fast growing, lots of seeds, then die. And then the seeds will do the same thing over. And doing that broke up the soil so that the stress tolerators and the competitors could come in later. And that's, what we call succession. So the reason I got onto that is because to me, when I can look at plants and figure out, the reason they're having problems there is they put in one competitive plant and all the other ones are stress tolerators, which they play nice in the garden. The competitors like Canada goldenrod does not play nice. So the stress tolerators do. And that's another aspect of understanding the soil, because if you have competitors, you want that soil to be poor. I am not putting compost on them, but I'm putting compost on my peonies and my roses, etc., but not on goldenrod.
Yeah, I would say I have a special place called the Hill Strip, and that's very compacted clay soil that gets no amendments, no extra compost, and that's where I definitely plant out those plants that love what we call horrible soil. So there's not too many usually sold at garden centers, but there's more sold by seed. And I was even thinking about nasturtium today. That's one of those plants that you'll see the advice that says lean soil or prefers not to be fertilized. Those are good indications of a plant that thrives in that kind of condition.
Yeah. And it is, I look at my own gardens and I see the different areas that I have and that I've developed, and some that I know are tough, and only my tough plants go there, like my backyard rock garden, which is on a slope where a tree is, but it's full sun coming at it, and it's a tough site. And I've lost a lot of plants there when I've put something in there that says, I'm sorry, this is too much sun. We're done here.
Or too much like straight afternoon sun.
Yeah, especially that.
Yeah. We were talking about ways to feed the soil, like give it compost, organic material. So when you're a beginning gardener, you are usually sold a tiller or told about, a tiller. And that's the way to incorporate these things into your soil. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on tilling and how you would add these things into your soil.
Good question. Really good question, because I'm of many minds of tilling, not tilling. When I first started here, I did till because the soil was horribly compacted, but I only tilled once or twice, and then I didn't till anymore. And any compost that I add in the spring and the summer, and I do what's called top dressing or side dressing. And I put it in between where plants are. I try not to snug compost or mulch or anything that I add to my gardens. I don't snug them up against the plants because I want the plants to be able to breathe. That's one way of saying it. Tilling the soil causes issues over time, especially if you keep on doing it. One of the important aspects of soil is soil structure. So soil structure is that all the holes, the microscopic holes made by fungi, bacteria, etc., and the macroscopic, the big worms, beetles, moles. That's really big hole. But that structure is really important. And plant roots also make these holes in the garden and create a structure. And there's a sort of glue that happens in the soil too. And every time you till, you break all that structure up, and the soil has to start all over again to make that structure. Now, we've been told that if you have an annual tomato garden or vegetable garden, that you till each year. And you really shouldn't. If first year, sure, go for it. And then put in all that compost, really till it. And then after that, you're adding on top. So I do a lot with soil health with an organization here in Ohio called OFA, Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. And I'm on the Soil Health Committee. And we talk about using regenerative practices. And one of those is minimal soil disturbance. Don't mess with your soil. You don't need to. And in farming, we call it low-till or no-till farming. And then adding cover crops, so those roots of those plants add to the structure of the soil. And that we use a biodiversity, a diverse palette of crops, plants, crops, whatever, in that area, and that we keep living roots in the soil. So it's not just annuals that we grow, but we grow perennials. So perennials, whether they're ornamental vegetables like asparagus, that is a perennial vegetable, living roots in the soil. And that's how we make soil healthy. Because when plants die, because not all the roots live every year, you have root shedding and then new roots grow. Those old roots add organic matter back into the soil, and we have what we call nutrient cycling. Be a lazy gardener. Don't till and let the soil recycle itself. That's my bottom line.
Great advice, and I would say the lazier the better. And
Well,
in the beginning, if you get sold the till thing, don't feel too guilty about it. Or maybe you've done the double dig that I've seen some gardeners. That's a whole lot of work, or the person who did it for you is not loving you anymore. But the double dig system where you go down, several feet and bring that good soil up, but you're also bringing up all those weed seeds and everything else. And again, you're breaking down the soil itself. But if you're starting off with highly compacted clay soils or highly compacted rocky soils, then maybe you do need to do a little bit of that to establish. But like you said, the top dressing on the surface, it just kind of disappears after a while. And it's not the wind, it's actually working itself into the soil.
I'm glad you said that, because wind and water is what carries our soil away. And if we allow soil to recycle itself, it's more healthy and it is less likely to be washed away by water or blown away by wind. Thank you for saying that.
I just have such a pet peeve when people say, that gardens are dusty or something. And I'm like, I don't know what garden you've been in, but maybe in the West, or where it's very sandy, or where there's a lot of uncovered soil. That's not usually happening in most of our growing zones, at least in the Mid-Atlantic, and I think most of the Midwest.
Well, even out west, they do have coverings on the soil, but it's a different kind of crust that you have to be really careful that you don't disturb, because when you do, that crust is just like the structure of our eastern soils. Once you destroy it or disturb it, it takes years and years for it to come back.
Yeah, and we want to do all the least amount of work possible to preserve that good soil, especially once we've worked years and years to establish it. So what are your top amendments, Deborah? And also, when is the best time to amend? So some people will do a spring restart or reboot. Some people say, no, wait till the fall.
And I'm going to answer that with, it depends. So, of course, in my vegetable garden, I use leaf mulch and mushroom compost. I also use animal manures. We have a great product here in Central Ohio called Zoo Brew, which is elephant poo from the zoo and other ungulates and other herbivores. You don't want poo from carnivores because of
Mhm.
parasite issues. But Zoo Brew is phenomenal. Putting animal manures into the soil really wakes them up. I leave the leaves in my garden. They make their own mulch. I don't leave the leaves in my rock gardens. I do blow those out with my battery operated blower, which is very quiet. Set on low because I don't want to blow the world away. I just want to get the leaves out. And so vegetable gardens, and then in my perennial gardens, a lot of times I'm not adding amendments unless I'm planting something new. Then I dig up the whole area where something's going in, incorporate compost at that point, not necessarily tilling, but just, kind of that 1 to 2, wait a minute, let me think, 2 to 3 square foot area, depending on what's going in, and then top dressing with compost again. When to do it? So for my roses and peonies, I like to give them a spring wake up call. So they get it they get mushroom compost or my compost because I do compost all of our kitchen scraps. So my compost in the spring, if I notice they're looking peaked, I'll give them compost in the mid-fall. Now this year it hasn't happened yet, and I hope it doesn't, but last year when we had that amazing drought, there were actual cracks in my clay soil. So I went and got some of my compost and I vertically mulched by putting compost in the cracks in the middle of summer so that when the rain finally did come, it washed some of that compost in and it went down to the root zones of my plants and at the same time protected my plants from somewhat from the heat. If we get those really high heats and no rain, I will go out in summer and put down compost around plants that are starting to look peaked, especially my woody plants. I have a lot of investment of time in those beautiful plants. So it's mostly, when do you need it? When's the time to do it is when it looks like you need to, but I will do both spring and fall for some plants in my garden.
So I was going to say, I love the term vertical mulching.
I just kind of came up with that one because I'm thinking, oh, look, I'm putting it in the crack and it's going down, vertical mulching.
And I think I do something similar to when I'm going to call it trying to cheat a little and get just one more daffodil bulb in there. So I'm like sticking a really thin razor shovel into the ground and I'm trying to disturb as little soil as possible. Not trying to make a hole, but I'm just trying to get a few more bulbs in there. So I'll kind of just put a razor shovel in and wiggle it back and forth a tiny bit, then put some bulbs down as far as possible, and then stick some compost or leaf mulch or whatever I have on hand, organic material, to fill that back in. And it's not really a hole. I would call it a slit in the ground.
Vertical mulching.
Yep. And the bulbs have loved it, let me tell you. It's like they've just barely snugged in there, but get them down as far as you can. And then, the creatures aren't touching them either.
And compost, especially animal manures, kind of confuse the nose of chipmunks and squirrels. So while they don't usually go after your daffs, that might be a way to semi-protect your tulip bulbs, kind of confusing their scent awareness.
Yeah, all the little minor bulbs I'm sneaking in there because I'm like, okay, one or two more could just fit in this little crack here. But I was going to say on the zoo, we used to have for the National Zoo, the Zoo Dew, and you could go and pick it up, but that is no longer the case, unfortunately, for those who are wondering about going over in Washington, D.C. to the National Zoo. But you can check out local horse stables. You can go to local rescue farms. We'll have aged manure and fresh manure. Of course, if it's fresh, you do want to age it before you use it as a soil amendment.
What I have done with unaged manure is when I have a new area and I may have some weed seeds or maybe not some great organisms, I'm hoping that the heat of a fresh manure will kind of maybe reset that soil area. I don't have any scientific background for that, or testing or whatever. It's just sort of an intuitive feeling, which I think gardening is a lot of.
Mm-hmm. And I would call it ongoing experimentation, just, home experimentation, trying it this way, trying it that way, and then seeing what does best for your local conditions.
And that's always important. We are such a global community. We can read something from California, from Minnesota, from Florida, from Texas, and yet you always have to remember that that's California, Minnesota, Florida, Texas, not Maryland, not Ohio. And it's not only the soil, but the climate and everything else that goes together. I remember someone saying they saw something on HGTV that they really, really loved, and they were going to put it in their garden. And I said, you can do that, but then it's going to be an annual.
Mm-hmm.
So I love your point that yes, understanding your local conditions, your local soil is so important as a gardener.
This is all things gardening really comes down to local and your region. And so I was going to ask you, Deborah, to tell us who are not in Ohio a little bit about your growing conditions and what you're growing.
So I grow as much as I can. Fruits and vegetables. I love conifers, although in the recent years I have lost quite a few because our winters are getting warmer and our summers are getting hotter, and they're just saying, forget that. When you have a conifer that's native to Siberia, it doesn't like hot Ohio. My lawn, I call my low meadow, a mix of, oh gosh, every weed known to all the folks who would like to help me get rid of those weeds. You get the little thing on your mailbox, we can help you with your lawn. Clover, ground ivy, plantains, you name it. I have enclosed one of my vegetable gardens because if I didn't, the deer would eat it all, and the raccoons. We have all of the animals. I have lots of perennials. I have a rock garden. I have 26 different garden areas, and about this year, I didn't get as many of my annual containers planted, so I only have about 20, and I have about 25 troughs, which have plants that don't like being in clay soil. So these are troughs that stay outside, the hypertufa troughs, the kind that you can make. So my garden is a mix of everything that I want in the world, and I keep trying new plants and seeing how far I can go. Although I have to say I've kind of lessened that. My experimentation phase may have mostly passed, but I would not turn away an interesting plant that I see on a travel and think, can I grow that in my garden? That question I still ask. So I did mention that I have a silty clay for the most part, and that my pH is 6.7 to 7.23. And it's a 40-year-old garden, and it has changed as I have changed as a gardener. And it's nothing like what I thought it was going to be, because I thought I was going to have the classic English herb garden and the classic borders like Gertrude Jekyll, and it's nothing like that at all.
Mm-hmm. And did you say your zone for temperatures?
So right now we are rated as a cold 6, which would be 6B, which is minus 5 to minus 10. But we haven't really reached that very often. I'd say we're more like a warm 6A, to a cold 7B, which is 5 degrees above 0 to 0. And in the past 12 years, I think we've had 7 years that could be classified as a Zone 7 winter,
Wow.
which is Raleigh, North Carolina.
Definitely. So definitely seeing changes in every region.
We are.
How can listeners contact you to find out more, Deborah?
I do have a website. It's DeborahTheGardenSage.com is my website. I'm also on Facebook and I'm on Instagram, although I don't use that as much, but I'm going to try to use it more. And on there, I'm at Sagey Lady, Sagyylady. So, and if you have a question, you can get onto my website, and there is a place where you can get in touch with me.
Excellent. Any final advice, Deborah, for listeners and soil care?
Use your intuition. If something doesn't feel right, stop. If it feels good, keep going. And remember, it's your garden, not somebody else's garden. And if you like the plant palette, the colors, art, whatever, then do it. It's your garden, not someone else's.
Thank you, Deborah.
You're very welcome. It's so nice to talk.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
Gomphrena plant profile. Globe amaranth, Gomphrena globoso, is a drought-tolerant annual flower. It blooms in tight balls in an array of colors including pink, purple, white, red, and orange. It's native to Central and South America and is hardy to USDA zones 9 to 11. It thrives in hot, full sun locations with well-draining soils. It's a prolific bloomer, and it's a great choice for cutting gardens. It does well in both fresh and dried bouquets. It's easy to propagate from seed, and it can self-seed if you let it. This is a low-maintenance plant. You can deadhead it or pinch it back to encourage a bushier shape, if you like. It does not need fertilizer, though a top dressing of compost in the root zone can be beneficial. Gomphrena attracts pollinators, including hummingbirds, to the garden. It's generally considered to be deer-resistant. Gomphrena, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, I'm enjoying the blooms on the sunflowers and goldenrods. Everything is coming up yellow now in the garden. At the community garden plot, we're picking our first zucchini of the season. In garden tips that we shared this week, we shared several about growing figs, including that fig trees hate root competition, so make sure there are no weeds or other plantings in their root zone. You can mulch lightly in that area to retain the soil moisture. In upcoming gardening events, if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, you might be interested in enrolling in the Environmental Horticultural Program at Montgomery College in Montgomery County, Maryland. They offer a wide range of courses perfect for professional landscapers, passionate gardeners, or anyone who simply loves plants and the environment. Classes begin for the fall semester the week of September 3rd and are available in multiple formats, in person, online, or hybrid. To find out more, contact Steve Dubick at steve.dubick@montgomerycollege.edu. And then the Herb Society of America is hosting their Mid-Atlantic District Gathering for fall 2025 on Friday, September 5th in Northern Virginia. Part of that program and symposium includes garden tours to Little Oatlands in Leesburg, Virginia, and Oak Spring Garden in Upperville, Virginia. You can register for that at herbsociety.org. Finally, friend of the podcast, Janet Draper, is retiring from her long tenure at the Smithsonian's Ripley Garden. We wish her much success in the next chapter of her gardening life. Happy gardening!
This is The Last Word by Christy Page at Green Prints. We have Max, Mia, and the Mistress of Sunflowers, a story by Jane and Thompson. One bright afternoon, my daughter Mia and I embarked on what we thought would be a straightforward mission, planting sunflowers. Armed with a packet of seeds, a couple of trowels, and an overabundance of ambition, we dug into the soil, imagining a parade of sunflowers standing tall and proud, saluting us with their golden faces. Simple, right? Enter Max, our lovable, overenthusiastic golden retriever with a personality as big as his paws. Naturally, he sensed that something exciting was happening in the garden. And by exciting, I mean he interrupted our careful seed planting as an open invitation to join what he clearly thought was some kind of sunflower-themed game show. As we gently dropped the seeds into the soil, Max, bless his chaotic heart, made a grand entrance. He zoomed through the garden, transforming it into what can only be described as a sunflower apocalypse. Dirt flew. Paw prints crisscrossed, and our careful rows of future flowers looked more like crop circles made by an alien with a sense of humor. Mia and I couldn't contain our laughter. We had been trying to create something beautiful, but Max had far more entertaining plans. Once Max had sufficiently bulldozed the area and exhausted his zoomies, we replanted, this time with fewer expectations and a better sense of humor. Days passed, and slowly but surely, little green shoots began to appear. Our sunflowers, no doubt confused but persistent, started their ascent toward the sky. Fast forward a few weeks, and there they were, a row of magnificently wonky sunflowers. Some stood tall, some leaned dramatically, and one seemed to have given up entirely and was facing the ground as if looking for its dignity. But to our eyes, they were perfect. Then one morning, I spotted Max sitting proudly amidst the blooms, as if he were the sunflower's personal mascot. His tail thumped the ground in approval, no doubt admiring his handiwork. That's when I realized Max hadn't ruined our sunflower patch. He had added his own special touch. Our garden wasn't just a place where plants grew. It was a stage where laughter, love, and a little bit of chaos danced together in perfect harmony. And you know what? Those sunflowers, crooked though they were, became the pride of our garden. Neighbors stopped by to admire them, offering smiles and stories of their own gardening mishaps. In the end, those flowers weren't just sunflowers. They were reminders that life's best moments are often the ones where things go hilariously off-plan. Now, every time I look out at those gloriously goofy sunflowers, I'm reminded that perfection is overrated. It's the unpredictable, muddy-pod moments that really make life bloom. This has been Christy Page with greenprints.com.
This episode was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Jentz. Intern Colin Davan edited the interview with our expert guest. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to GardenDC Podcast 187 about mulches, GardenDC Podcast Episode 71, Soil Health, GardenDC Podcast Episode 136, Home Composting. By the way, you can become a listener supporter and subscriber. Find that link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardenerBlogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media and with your gardening friends. Use hashtag GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.